Yesterday's meeting was a massive victory for Zelenskyy in Ukraine, and understanding why requires looking closely at what Putin really wanted from it. This was a classic trap, straight out of the KGB playbook, a trap Putin likely learned during his failed spy days in East Germany. Putin laid out a simple offer: I want peace, and all I want for peace is the Donbas region. He knew full well that Zelenskyy and the Ukrainian people would never agree to such a surrender. The real goal behind this was to force Zelenskyy to say, no, I won't give up any land you haven't taken. So Putin could then shift the blame and paint Zelenskyy as the obstacle to peace. This would serve Moscow's propaganda, blaming Ukraine to justify cutting off Western weapons and intelligence support. But Zelenskyy brilliantly flipped the script in his meeting with Trump. He stated unequivocally that territorial concessions should be discussed directly between Ukraine and Russia, no intermediaries. Meanwhile, security guarantees will be negotiated with Ukraine's partners and formalized in the coming days. This move is something Putin can't afford right now. For years, Russian media has portrayed Zelenskyy as illegitimate, saying he's not the real leader of Ukraine according to its constitution. Now, Putin is forced to publicly acknowledge Zelenskyy by agreeing to meet him or risk exposing his own lies to the Russian public and the world. The truth we've been uncovering since this war began is now impossible for Moscow to deny. Putin isn't after peace, he's after Ukraine itself. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg called the day very successful and described Trump as a pragmatic peacemaker who, despite tough rhetoric, is pushing to break the deadlock and bring an end to this conflict. Stoltenberg highlighted Trump's efforts to funnel lethal weapons into Ukraine, financed by Europeans, and impose sanctions on countries like India to keep the pressure on Russia. The path forward includes discussing security guarantees, holding further virtual meetings, and eventually a trilateral summit with Putin, Zelenskyy, and Trump to map out the future steps. Even Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel, one of the few voices pushing strongly for a ceasefire, reiterated this during a public statement, emphasizing that real negotiations demand silence of arms, with skepticism about whether Putin will show the courage to attend such a summit. This sentiment reflects the tension between a ceasefire's humanitarian appeal and its possible strategic disadvantages.
Why might Russia reject a ceasefire? Because it gives Ukraine precious time to reinforce defenses with new troops, equipment, and fortifications, making it harder for Russia to bend Ukraine to its will. Plus, even Russia's incremental gains on the battlefield have come at an unsustainable cost in casualties. Putin's focus remains clear: grab as much territory as possible before any meaningful peace. The U.S. seems to have abandoned hopes of a ceasefire, pivoting instead towards pushing a comprehensive peace agreement. The Donbas region is the centerpiece of the fight. A cluster of heavily fortified Ukrainian cities forming a fortress belt has withstood Russian advances for over a decade. Putin's demand that Ukraine relinquish this stronghold, despite repeated failures, is at odds with Ukraine's adamant refusal, knowing full well that surrendering it would expose major cities like Kharkiv to future invasion. History warns loud and clear: the 2014 ceding of Crimea, done under U.S. and NATO advice to avoid wider war, only whetted Russia's appetite. The 2022 invasion, launched from that very peninsula, unleashed some of Russia's greatest gains so far. Ukraine's ironclad resolve to defend Donbas is both a military necessity and a lesson learned the hard way. Putin's constant propaganda machine spins this resistance as Ukrainian intransigence. He weaponizes misinformation and bot armies to sow doubt in the West, hoping to choke off arms supplies and isolate Ukraine. But Western support remains strong, bolstered by revelations like those exposed to Trump, showing Russian state media mocking the U.S. relentlessly. Putin's control over Russian media is absolute, with every message approved by the Kremlin. This is a carefully crafted campaign aimed at normalizing aggression and delegitimizing Ukraine on the world stage. The world can't afford to ignore that, as ignoring these signals once allowed a dictator like Hitler to wage war unchecked. Meanwhile, Ukraine is pushing hard for fair compensation from Russia for the vast war damages, demanding frozen Russian assets worth an estimated $300 billion be used only if Russia plays by the rules in any future peace deal. As talks proceed, Russia's continued bombing of civilian targets shows a nation unwilling to embrace peace and fixated instead on war. It's brutally clear, Russia wants Ukraine destroyed, not negotiated with. Against all odds, the meeting ended better than expected, catching Moscow off guard and forcing it to backtrack on some promises made to Trump the week before. Trump's post-meeting statement celebrated the progress, highlighting coordination with European allies to deliver security guarantees to Ukraine, and announcing upcoming meetings with Putin and Zelenskyy to hammer out details. Yet Kremlin's response was cold, publicly denying any agreement on security guarantees or NATO-like protections. This contradictory messaging is part of a long-standing Kremlin tactic: say one thing in private and the opposite in public, a strategy designed to delay peace and keep the war dragging on. But the most groundbreaking breakthrough came with Putin's tacit acceptance, through his envoys, that the US and Europe can offer Ukraine Article 5-like security guarantees. This means that any attack on Ukraine would be treated as an attack on every member of the coalition backing Ukraine, similar in spirit, though not in name, to NATO's historic Mutual Defense Clause. It's a first-of-its-kind concession from Moscow, signaling a potential shift in the conflict's landscape if implemented. This moment offers a glimmer of hope amid years of brutal war and constant deception. Yet the path is steep, the Kremlin's duplicity continues, and peace talks remain fragile. The world watches eagerly, knowing that the coming weeks will test whether diplomacy can truly break through, or if strategy and shadow plays will keep Ukraine fighting for its very survival.